Hello and welcome to Pro Wrestling 101. I am JP John Paz from the two-man power trip of wrestling. And of course, the star of this show, the former ECW World Heavyweight Champion, the former ECW World Tag Team Champion, and the eight-time WWF Hardcore Champion at least 8 times,
At least.
Mr. Justin Incredible PJ Polacco. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, John. How are you, my friend? How was your Thanksgiving?
I was very, very good. How was yours?
It was great. Glad to hear it. Yeah, things were great. We just, very mellow, quiet, made a nice meal. So that's all you could ask for.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very quiet. Definitely different from years past, where it's,
Mm.
like thousands of people in the house, and this
Yeah.
is very quiet and very subdued. A lot less people than normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And mine had nothing to do with COVID. It just happened to be the situation around. My family had moved back to Portugal. And we celebrated with my mom and dad. So it was just me, my wife, and my youngest, where my oldest two were with grandma over in Jersey. We were going to go to Jersey, but with COVID and stuff, grandma was a little like, just stay home. Because I
Right.
traveled, I'd been in LA this past week. So it was like better safe than sorry.
Yep. Absolutely. Hanging out with Cebu, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
How did that go with him? That crazy
It
bastard.
was it was fun. It was fun. He's going through a lot with Melissa and getting her leg amputated, which has got to be horrific. I can't imagine. He was really I'd never seen Sabu kind of so upset. It was really heartfelt. I felt so bad for him, but she's strong. He's strong, and a lot of prayers and love and support. So, we're wishing the best for her.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. And
Yeah.
you mentioned your family moving
Mm.
back to Portugal. I think a lot of people don't realize you're actually Portuguese. That was a real, life gimmick of the Portuguese Man of
Yeah.
War. You were really Portuguese.
Yeah, it really was. I born and raised in Connecticut, but my mom and dad came here in 1970. They immigrated here in their 20s. So yeah, I've even though I was born here, I'm from 100% Portuguese descent, speak it the whole nine yards. So yeah,
Nice. Aldo Montoya is legit. It's a
that's a
real
sh- it's a
shoot.
shoot, brother.
Yes, yes, love that. Now, today, as far as the Pro Wrestling 101 topic, wanted to talk about something that you've talked before, and that is hitting the ropes. Feel
Yes.
like it's one of those things that people don't even think about. You don't even like kind of
Yeah.
comprehend it. You can't put your mind around it. But I noticed a lot in today's wrestling, and especially I've noticed it in AEW. It's weird, like the way the guys hit the ropes, very soft. It's almost like
Yeah.
they're doing a ballet routine or a
Right.
gymnast routine. They're not really doing a wrestling. So tell us a little bit about hitting the ropes.
Sure. The whole thing about hitting the ropes is if of course I'm saying the big if, but if wrestling was real, and that's anytime you do wrestling, you're really supposed to try to make it as real as you can. And I know that sounds weird, like an oxymoron, wrestling real, but nonetheless, you want to try to make it look as genuine as possible. And if you're getting shot off the ropes or you're using the ropes, you really are using the ropes for either escaping, like if somebody has you in a headlock, you're shoving them off to try to get rid of them. Therefore, they use the momentum of the ropes to slingshot you back, right? That's the purpose. Is those ropes are supposed to slingshot you. So anytime you're taking the ropes, it's really to gather momentum to shoot back at the person with more velocity, right?
Yep.
And when I really noticed, I mean, the Hearts really emphasized hitting the ropes very hard, very strict as a matter of fact. Because if you watch Bret Hart, I mean, he was a master at really hitting the ropes, hitting the turnbuckles. Same with Owen, and when I wrestled, or not even so much wrestled, but when I was around Stone Cold, Steve Austin, I saw the way he hit the ropes. I mean, he hit the ropes like a bat out of hell. I mean, he was 250-pound freight train hitting those things as hard as he could to gain the momentum. I mean, he was really like one of those guys, and it was really kind of an impressive thing to see. So, I think it really added to the presentation of what we do in the ring in pro wrestling. So, and nowadays, unfortunately, I think it's sort of a means to an end these days when it's more of what you're supposed to do in a high spot. You hit the ropes, so forth, but the actual purpose of what it means is kind of lost, and which therefore the execution of said move is really lackluster. And you when you watch it today, guys are shooting you off kind of you're supposed to. I can't do a great demonstration, obviously, because we're doing it this way. But if I was in a wrestling ring, I would show that if I'm shooting someone off, I'm releasing them in the middle of the ring, which is about 6, 7 feet away from the ropes. Right? You're not supposed to have like a whole huge distance to kind of cross. You know what I mean? Because how realistic is it? Somebody pushes you and you go running towards the ropes, right? It's supposed to be a short movement. Therefore, when you hit the ropes and slingshot yourself, it's supposed to be that way. So, to me, man, it's just a very almost, it's because it's done so much, it's passe, and people just kind of use it as a matter of fact instead of really utilizing what it was for. So yeah, I mean, I think hitting the ropes is something that really is one of those basic things which nobody should ignore. I think that brings someone's game up considerably, and that goes like to say on one of the things I always talk about is some of the things that the office in the WWE always looks for, the agents, the inner workings, the veterans there. It's a very important thing because it really does matter in the visual effect of if you hit the ropes properly or if you're just kind of running into them and then magically shooting yourself out, unless and instead of the other way where you're really hitting them and actually using said momentum to catapult you over.
Yeah, I feel like Steve Austin, like you mentioned earlier, definitely one of those guys that it's like, wow, look at the way he hits the rope so hard and so
Yeah,
fast. It's almost like, he's going to kill somebody hitting those
yeah,
ropes. That's the way it should be done, right? I mean, that's not really
yeah.
like um, too crazy the way he does it, right? I mean, that's not over the top at all.
It's not over the top at all, but it's kind of though it's unfortunate, but it's what we have become accustomed to. So I think younger men and women in the business kind of think that's, whether it's lack of training or lack of good advice during training, but if done properly, it could be a thing of beauty. And you know, it's again, it's something that has to be done right, and it doesn't take much. But it's like doing the alphabet A B C D. You can't start at A and then go all the way to R. You know, you need to learn how to lock up, learn how to grab a headlock, learn how to work the arm, learn how to run ropes, learn how to take a bump. It's all like the very, very basics of professional wrestling. And it's one that gets looked over way too much because it really does add a real another level into someone's game, especially if it's done correctly the way it was meant to be done, because so few people are doing it today. The proper way, I should say.
So when like your first training with the Hearts, is that one of the first things you do? You go in the ring, or
Yeah.
is it much you do cardio first and then you go in the ring?
You would do cardio first, of course. You'd warm up, you'd stretch, and then you'd do about a mile and a half of jogging, just to get your cardio up a bit. And then you would practice your rolls. You would practice your bumps. There would be the classic flat back bump, and then there would be the flip bump, like a bump you take on an arm drag or a hip toss. And then the next thing would be running the ropes. And literally for us, the way I was taught, and the way many others are, to be frank, is the rings are usually a couple of feet different from one another. Some are bigger, some are smaller, but they're all around the same, between 18 and 22 feet. And you should have like a big, and I say this, and it's hard for people that don't know what I'm talking about, so I'll try to make it relatable. If you take like a big step forward, because when you hit the ropes, you lean into it with your right arm. Your butt hits the middle rope, your shoulder blade hits the top rope, and you spring yourself off with your right foot leading. Now, to get to that other side, it's really a two-step, then turn. So you take one giant step, a second giant step, pivot, same thing. You hit your butt, you hit your right arm, under the armpit, and you shoot off. But in today's wrestling, unfortunately, you see a lot of lucha libre style stuff where you're almost just running by the guy, tapping him, and they're hitting the ropes barely to springboarding themselves out. And I think it's a real disservice to the intensity, because if done right, I mean, if you go back, and I'm sure you remember some of this, Ricky Steamboat versus Randy Savage, WrestleMania 3. Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage, like they'd grab, Savage would grab a headlock, or Steamboat, whomever, and he would shoot him off the ropes so hard. And the way he came off with the shoulder tackle, it's like that was real force. That was real force in real time. And you could feel and see the impact. And something so simple as a shoulder tackle looked so much more than what it really was, which today is more like just a means to an end of a bigger high spot, where really, if done properly, you could use that to be something more than, you know what I'm saying? I
Hmm.
don't know if it makes sense, but it's just
Yep.
something, when done correctly, could be really, really cool. And like I said, it's a wow kind of factor, especially when someone is hitting the ropes like a Steve Austin or many others. Like a lot of the Japanese men and women hit the ropes very well. They go at it with force, and they use the momentum, to actually gain velocity in the ring. Which means a lot.
And you got to make sure you have your arm up, right? When you're hitting that rope, when you hit it, just
Yep,
because if you don't have it up, you might almost literally
fall
go
through.
through the ropes. Yep.
Absolutely, and that's happened a lot too. I mean, I was watching something on, I think it was on Twitter today, where a young kid was hitting the ropes to do a dive, and he literally didn't have his arm hooking the top rope, which is to prevent you falling on, falling out, and he almost went through, which could be could be catastrophic. You could fall on your head, you could go right through. So it's very important to do it, and do it well.
It's crazy. Like
Yeah.
it's the basics, it's the fundamentals, but a lot of the guys don't do it. I feel like they just either don't care, they skip over it, they forgot about it. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it.
I think in wrestling today, and this has been for a while, not just today, but in wrestling, I think people are so concerned with the maneuvers. Like, in wrestling, we weren't taught vertical, like superplexes or pile drivers or stuff of that nature. We were taught the very basics, which was the boring stuff, really. The chain wrestling, the hitting of the ropes, the hitting of the turnbuckles, the psychology of it all, and the rest you kind of learned along the way. Trust me, they weren't teaching pedigrees or stunners or diamond cutters or whatever kind of moves in wrestling school. That was stuff afterwards. You were just really getting the bare basics, and it's kind of said, if you know the basics and if you know them very well, the rest is quite easy. You should be able to then adjust during, and of course you have, if you're starting off in the business, first year or two, you're really, just getting your groove, just kind of figuring out, hey, this is how I do this stuff. So I think men and women are so excited, to get out there and start having these great matches with these great high spots that they see on television, that instead of doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing, the building blocks, so to speak, of pro wrestling, that they're already trying to do superplexes and drop kicks off the top or whatever, moonsaults, and which is fine. But again, I always erred on the side of caution, and I always said this to young men and women: nothing will get you hired quicker than if you have your basics down to a T, which is not easy to do, by the way, to do it crisp and to do it like it's second nature. And then the other stuff will come very easily. So I just see a lot of the important steps in pro wrestling being skipped, and running the ropes, hitting the ropes, and really incorporating them into a sound technical background is understated. If you watch Benoit, Guerrero, Malenko, all those guys hit the ropes like they owed him money, and those are,
Hmm.
I'm talking about some of the best wrestlers of the past 25 years. So there's a common theme of how important it looks to the overall visual of it, that we may not, we see it, but we might not think about it, right? We're just looking at the overall spectacle and how cool everything looks and how crisp. But if you go back and really analyze it, a lot of it comes down to just straight up basic stuff that sometimes isn't being done in today's in-ring product.
Yeah, for sure. And I
Yeah.
think a big thing that about hitting the ropes you don't realize is footwork, right? I mean, certain
Yeah.
like there's got to be a certain way you hit the rope and almost go on the back part of your foot and kind of almost use it as a little, you use the rope as a springboard, and then you land on the ball of your foot and then go forward, right? There's a
Yeah,
lot of footwork and technique
there's
involved.
a lot of footwork involved. And literally, when I'm approaching the rope to hit it, I will launch off, and this is, I mean, now it's second nature, but I launch myself off my left foot. I then completely throw my body. I'm literally airborne. I mean, it doesn't airborne. I'm saying I leave my feet and throw myself with my left foot. And as I'm doing so, I'm hitting the ropes. That's what stops me. And my right foot is kicked out, so to speak. So when the ropes drive me and push me forward, that right foot is always already in midair, ready for the first step. So you don't have to sidestep or do little mini steps. It's already there. You're coming off, boom, you hit your stride right away. You know what I mean? Is which you gain such an advantage in speed and in, you know what I mean, just accuracy, and just the whole it just looks smooth, you know what I mean, instead of like choppy. Some guys, if you watch, some guys look like they're stopping at the ropes, and instead of hitting them, you know what I mean.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I remember I did some training, and it was with Mike Quackenbush, and he
Okay.
literally told me not to move but stay on like the back part of my feet,
Yep.
and he pushed me into the ropes, and the momentum kind
Yep.
of swung me forward, and then he's like, then you step forward. So it
Right.
was really it was like, oh, I never really like realize until you're actually in the ring doing it. You're like, wow, there's a lot more footwork and stuff and technique, and then you got to use the momentum and your balance and stuff,
Yeah.
and obviously you got to make sure you get your arm up too, because you don't want anybody falling through the rope breaking their neck. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's much more precise and difficult than you think, because you think, anybody can just do it, just running back in the ropes. But then you see some people do it wrong. You're like, oh boy, okay, now I
Yeah.
can see what happened.
Absolutely, and you said it best. It's almost like an afterthought, right? And that's, if you were to ask layman who does not watch wrestling on the regular or does not train in wrestling or know much about it, you would think that's just, you just, whatever. But no, it's very much footwork goes into it, and a lot of athletic timing and effort. So yeah, it's a huge part of, if you're going to do that kind of stuff and you're going to work with that kind of stuff, it's something you should be able to master moving forward. And I just wish more guys and gals would simplify their game, work on those little things that we talk about quite regularly here in Pro Wrestling 101, and then it's amazing how much the other stuff just kind of comes easier to you. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you take care of your like basic math, man, you can't know complicated algebra or certain other, math kind of stuff if you don't know basic arithmetic and math. And it's like wrestling. If you don't know the basic kind of structure to it, you won't be able to do, those great long matches that we all love and watch on WWE television.
You mentioned Steve Austin and Bret Hart and
Yep.
Owen Hart. Those are like the first guys I was thinking of too that really knew
Yeah.
how to run the ropes and did it
Yep.
right. Another guy I was thinking of that you probably would never think of as far as running the ropes or doing anything fundamentally good, but I always loved the way the Ultimate Warrior ran the ropes. Just aggressive as hell. Like,
Yeah.
and he ran them probably more than anybody. If you think about it, every move
Yeah.
he was running off the ropes. I always loved his tenacity and the way he ran the ropes, the intensity of it. I always felt like he was great at it too.
He was, and it's just funny because you don't think that someone like the Warrior, you don't attest to him knowing, not knowing, but applying that kind of stuff. But it just goes to show the generation he came up in, how important those certain moves, because back in those days, especially, you did not get taught a whole lot from wrestling schools or whoever trained you. In the 80s, you were kind of, a lot of times you were half a mark going into those matches. You weren't
Hmm.
fully smartened up. So, they taught you a couple of things. So, that kind of stuff, running the ropes, was one of the things that was very much instilled in the early goings. And as time went on and wrestling became more complicated and more aerial and more spot orientated, I think men and women and also teachers of wrestling, became less concerned about, the basics, the 101s of it all, and kind of gave young men and women getting into it what they felt they paid for, which was they wanted to learn how to do the move of the week, whatever stuff that, they see on TV, instead of saying no, because how many times were we told, no, you can't do this, you're going to work on this till you get it. then maybe down the line you could learn that. And I think that's you see that now in wrestling, like Orange Cassidy, for example. He's over. A lot of people like him. I get it. He's not a bad wrestler, but God, some of the stuff he does is god awful. And because of his gimmick, and I know it's probably because of his gimmick, when he hits the ropes, he's hitting the ropes completely the wrong way. And one of these days, somebody said it to me the other day, he's going to get himself killed because he's one of those guys that'll probably fall right through the middle and top rope,
Yeah,
to the
and he's got his
floor.
hands in his pocket. Yeah,
And
yeah.
I know it's his. I get it. I'm not stupid. I get it. It's the gimmick, but that's it's some dangerous stuff. That stuff was taught that way for a reason.
Yep. Now, as far as hitting the ropes, I'm thinking of the ring just in general. Was ECW in a smaller ring than the WWF? It looked like it, but I don't know
Yeah,
the size and difference. So, what's the size difference of WWF, and what is the size of the
sure.
ECW ring?
The WWE ring is 22 feet, 22 by 22.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep, and ECW was 18 feet. And WCW was also smaller than the WWE ring. It was a 20 by 20. So ECW was the smaller of the rings. Then it was WCW at 20 feet each way. And WWE's rings were just a monstrosity. I know people that have worked in other places. And then finally, when they got to WWE, they were like, oh my God, what a difference. Because it's only realistically a half a step. Like in an ECW ring, I took two big steps to get from one end to the other. WWE it was two and a half, but you kind of work through it. Like I learned how to wrestle more or less in the WWE ring because even though the Hearts had a smaller ring, a lot of my professional career was early on in the WWE, so I got used to. You kind of are able to adapt, and that was always, no matter where I was, John. I got to the arena and I would always get in the ring and hit the ropes a handful of times before the night because not only are you worried about, you know, making sure, you got your stride, but also every night the ropes are tightened differently, because you have, the referees to this day are still the guys that put up the rings. And some rings are, believe it or not, even for the WWE, some are jacked up, some have holes in them, So sometimes I would remember getting to the WWE being first match, and I'd have to tell like Mike Chioda, like, dude, there's a hole here in the middle.
Hmm.
Like sometimes people wonder what the guys are doing in there. They're all talking to the refs and stuff. I'd always be like, yep, there's a hole right here. The top rope needs to be tightened. It'd be wicked loose, because WWE still uses, I believe to this day, the old school ropes, like real ropes, as opposed to AEW and WCW and even ECW. They used garden hose cables, like so that was a huge, huge difference. So yeah, that's also a big deal is kind of knowing, the tightness of the ropes and just your compatibility to hitting them. It's like once you get in that ring, it's your job to familiarize because every night, even if it's the same ring, it gets put up differently all the time. And that's one thing people don't do enough is kind of survey the land and see if everything is good to go.
Why was ECW's ring 18 by 18? Is that like the indie standard for rings, or what's the reasoning there?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't think it's a standard necessarily. I just think that's what was available. That's what was being made, because back then, there really wasn't I think today, like Pro Wrestling Tees might have a ring. High Spots, I know, sells rings. But back in the older days, it was just, people were making them. You'd get somebody that knows how to work with steel and with all that stuff would get the proper design and just go out to the hardware store and make a ring, buy all the stuff that they needed. So, I think it was just somebody had made this ring this way, designed it. Sometimes you'd make the ring size because that was the size truck you had, right, to transport the ring. So
Yep.
sometimes it was just a matter of that. The ring truck you owned maybe was only 18 feet or something like that. So a lot of times that was, believe it or not, the reasoning. But no, it wasn't necessarily a standard thing. It was just what it was. I don't even remember where we actually got that ring, but it was actually one of the best rings I'd ever worked with. Even believe it or not, better than WWE's. It was just a very nice, crisp bump, light bump. and it was always on point. So whoever made that ring was a really really good one.
ECW ring always was louder and sounded
Yes.
louder. Why
Yep.
is that the case?
I again, I just think that it was the boards that they used, and it also the louder they are, they tend to be lighter because the boards tend to jump more, and the more give you have, the easier the bump is. In WWE, it was the exact opposite. They used ECW used a thin plywood, where WWE used thick, almost not two by fours. They were like maybe 2x10s, planks instead of a big, thicker, a big, longer, thicker piece of wood, in circumference and in length, where WWE just used long planks, like 20 of them. So it was just a harder bump in general. And they also had to keep them that way because they had bigger athletes, right? They had Andre, who was absolutely huge and broke a lot of rings. If he was in an ECW ring, for example, Yokozuna, and took one of those big bumps, good chance that they break the ring, right? So WWE had always, especially in the earlier days, in the late '80s to early '90s, would use reinforced harder woods to handle that kind of weight. Hello, did I lose you?
Oh, sorry about that. I lost you for a second, but I'm back. So with that ring and being so big, you were saying with ECW, or well, Yoko and Andre would kill the ECW ring. When you think about it like that, first, is that unsafe at all, or it's not unsafe, just depending on how the guys use it?
Um, I don't think it's unsafe, but it's also the way the guys use it. I mean, it's because it's not something that is tested, right? You don't really, it's something that's very much a hodgepodge. You kind of just mess around with it. So it was never tested for certain weights. um, but I could imagine that if a guy the size of a Yokozuna or an Andre took a big enough bump, that would definitely break the plywood, because the plywood was much thinner in those smaller rings as opposed to the thickness of a WWE plank ring. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that would be, I don't know if somebody would get hurt, but they would probably have a hard time doing an 8 to 9 match card with that same ring. You'd
Yeah.
probably get a lot of holes and cracks.
Did you or like Sean Waltman or anybody like a smaller guy, would you get hurt a lot in
Uh,
those rings because they're so stiff?
bro, I remember wrestling Mantar in Canada, in like Ontario, in the dead of winter, like January, February, and you'd go to these small ice hockey arenas, with no heater, like literally no heaters in the locker rooms, except for like they'd bring in tiny space heaters. So you'd go outside, or out into the crowd, into the wrestling arena, and it was so cold. It's probably 50, 60 degrees, because that's where they play ice hockey, on the floor. And so the ring would be up, a good portion of the day, and it would just sit in the cold. And then you would take a bump. It was almost like, Mick Foley. Mick Foley said at once famously that the table bump he took at Hell in the Cell was much easier than the one he took when the cage fell, the choke slam through the top, because the ring was so much stiffer
Hmm.
than the table outside. And if you could imagine, that's, and I know he wasn't joking, because those rings were that stiff, and he wasn't that small of a guy. But
No.
for guys like me and Pac, whew, I mean, it hurt. Like a body slam hurt. It really did. So
Yeah, it's crazy because you gotta, if you're gonna be taking bumps and stuff, you gotta be
yeah.
able to, to like not get killed by the actual ring itself. It's kind of scary if you think about it a little bit.
It is, and towards the beginning of the Attitude Era, I think enough guys, like Shawn was on top at the time in '96, I believe he won the belt, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
They started to, the smaller guys that meant something, the top guys started to kind of bitch, like, "Hey, we're getting hurt in these rings," and that's when you probably could noticeably tell in the beginning of the Attitude Era that the rings had changed, not just in look, like the colors and so forth, but if you look at the actual way that the bump is, and if you watch closely enough, that the rings took a drastic turn around 1997, where they made it more wrestler friendly, because it was really like bad for a while, you know.
Yeah, and it's funny. Right before that, too, you did have even more Land of the Giants:
Yeah,
Diesel,
yeah,
Mabel,
yeah,
Yoko, Vader
yeah,
at one point. Duke the Jump to Drosey's a big dude. The
yeah,
Godwins are big dudes.
yeah,
Triple H is pretty big. I mean, you had all those big guys too, so I could see why you want the bigger ring for sure. And obviously Undertaker, Kane,
yeah,
so on.
yeah.
But
I mean, it
I
was, yeah, it really was made and built for those guys. You know, the smaller guys were less of a thing than those guys at the time. So until the change happened, where smaller athletes started to kind of climb up the card, it was really made for the big athlete.
So as far as ECW and that time period and the ring and everything else, was there ever any like extra added springs or any like maybe like a microphone or something? Because sometimes,
Hmm.
like let's say RVD, I mean,
Yeah.
he'd spring like to the moon, and you hear that loud. So was there anything added, like any sort of sound or any sort of spring or anything?
Nope.
Wow.
The arena was always mic'd the way it was, and it's just a loud, impactful noise, and all that really is the wood kind of coming up and smacking on the metal of the the outline of the ring. That's all it really is, because that's only the only way that the wood is kept down is by tightening the canvas with rope. And there's a quarter inch to a half inch pad of hard foam in there. But other than that, we really do rely. So when you see that big kind of spring, it's actually beneficial to the bump itself, and it makes it easier. So I would say the more spring, the better for the athlete, because you know what I mean. It's actually you're going down with it, as opposed to it just being a hard surface. And there was a lot of people used to always say there was kind of like this urban legend that they'd have a big spring in the middle of the ring, but they didn't, as a matter of fact. It probably would have been worse, because I think if they had a big spring in the middle, it would have probably made it a little harder. Because wrestling rings they have the squared circle, as they call it, and then
Hmm.
they have two iron beams that go across it, and that's it. That's it. And I think that just enables it to give it enough of a bounce. You know?
Nice. As
Yeah.
far as ECW in that ring, is that your favorite ring to work in? Just because you're not
Oh
getting
yeah.
killed by the bumps and stuff, it's a lot easier to work in that ring.
By far, by far. And a little side note, and actually, we talked about this on the first episode of Steve Austin's podcast I ever did with him. We talked about it. We used to always in the summer go to Rhode Island to these music tents, these small shows that we traditionally had done for over 2 decades, from the 70s onward. I think they still do them to this day. I'm not sure, but because they were small musical tents, WWE couldn't bring in their monster rings, so they were using these even smaller than 18 feet. They were using these small 16 feet rings that were purposely made for these small musical tent shows. You'd literally have to, if you were going to do a vertical suplex, you would have to suplex someone from corner to corner, right? You couldn't even go from rope to rope. That's how
Right.
small these rings were.
Wow.
But the bump that these things would give you was almost like landing on air. So one night, Jake Roberts was my manager, managing Aldo Montoya. I was wrestling the ringmaster, Steve Austin, and the bumps were so easy and they were so much fun that he literally suplexed me 10, 12 times. And every time it started to become a rib, right? Because the fans started counting along. And then Jake's on the outside. Oh, no, Steve, don't do it. I'm begging you, don't do it, man. And then Austin would be in the ring. Oh, God damn it, Jake, I'm going to do it. And he'd, boom, we do one vertical suplex, do another. You know what I mean? Because it was
Yep.
just, we were having so much fun because the bump was so light, and he was, everybody was just egging each other on and couldn't hold a straight face in the ring. But yeah, those were really fun rings to work with.
That's great, and it seems like if you get a nice ring, it might be not a night off, but it might be a little bit better on the body.
Yeah, it has actually. Having a good ring will extend your career more than people realize. I don't think people give it enough credit that having a good ring and having a really nice sweet spot in the ring will generate so much more, because all it takes is that one bad bump to just jar something out. So the more give any ring has, the better.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great stopping point for this episode. Want to just mention some plugs. You can
Yes.
follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Two Man Power Trip. You can follow PJ at PJ Polacco on Instagram and on Twitter. PJ, what else do you got going on?
December 5th, I will be at Wrestling Universe in Long Island, New York, where Jack Sabbath is opening up a brand new store. He has one in Queens, opening one up in Long Island. I think it's actually been open for a couple of weeks now. He's had talent going in and out of that place on the regular on the weekends. So the ECW crew will be there December 5th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. It has myself, Sabu, Danny Doring, and Roadkill, and I think Joel Gertner has just signed on.
Wow.
And yeah, it's going to be really cool. And December 13th, I will be returning to the Motor City, Detroit, Michigan, for a wrestling event there. I'll have more information because I just actually signed up for that booking last night. So I'll have more info on Twitter at PJ Polacco and also ProWrestlingTees.com/JustIncredible. You can check that out for all your holiday needs. We actually have a Black Friday 40% off sale going on right now. So check it out.
Great stuff. And of course, Vince Russo and the brand. You can follow us
Yes.
right here on YouTube. Just type in Vince Russo or Pyro and Ballyhoo. You'll find his awesome channel. He's got many, many shows and many clips and everything on there. Very, very highly entertaining. So just type in Vince Russo into YouTube, and obviously you will find this video amongst many others. You could also check out his Patreon, patreon.com/RussoTWC. PJ, what do you got going on Patreon with Vince?
Yeah, we got this great AEW review show. It's been going on now for almost 14 months straight. We've been on every Friday. No ifs, ands, or buts. We're always there. We go live on Twitch, 10 a.m. on Fridays. Then the actual show in its entirety comes out a little bit later on. It actually should be out right now, as a matter of fact. I taped it earlier today, so check that out. It's usually somewhat controversial, but always fun with Vince. So check that out.
AEW next week. You think it'll do over 1 million viewers?
I'm curious to see what they did this week. I do not see them going over 1 million next week. No, I don't, unfortunately, but I hope they prove me wrong.
Yes. I think the ratings were delayed because of Thanksgiving, because I was
Yeah,
looking for them too, and
absolutely.
I couldn't find them yet. But I was thinking, will they do 1 million with that big title match of Omega and Moxley? But I don't know. I'm not
I don't
feeling it. I'm not
know.
seeing it.
I think they've squandered, Moxley as much as I like him. We talked about it today on the podcast. I think all of Moxley's feuds have been kind of very similar. Everything's eerily similar to him getting kind of knocked out or beaten up. They get some heat on him. And then, of course, he goes to the big match, goes over. We've seen it again and again with a little, almost like a lack of real creativity, So I'm curious to see how they go about this one. But also, did they pull the trigger too late, too early? Because Kenny Omega is just recently now, again, like over the past week or so, has become the cleaner. So we'll see. I mean, because a lot of people have criticized that Kenny Omega did not resemble the Kenny Omega of New Japan. So I don't know, man. Will he have the ratings power to grab a 1 million? I mean, I hope so. Listen, the better for wrestling, the better for us. So I hope they do, but I don't see them there just yet.
Should be interesting. I think
Yes.
maybe it's time for Omega to be champion after not really
Maybe.
doing anything for a year. So maybe,
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
we'll see. You could also follow my website,
Absolutely.
tmptempire.com, and checking out, trying to build a new Patreon. So I invite everybody to check it out over there, patreon.com/tmptempire. Got a lot of great stuff on there as well. So PJ, why don't you take us out the only way you know how?
Absolutely. This Pro Wrestling 101, John from Two Man Power Trip, and myself, it's not just the coolest, it's not just the best. Pro Wrestling 101, we are just incredible. We'll see you back here next week.